Good afternoon, distinguished guests, participants. First of all, I would like to express my sincere thanks to the project consortium and partner institutions of the conference for this organization and for their invitation to the event as one of the keynote speakers. Today, I would like to discuss why youth is important for the inclusion of refugees and why young people should be considered in the center of all these debates. Well, in order to make this discussion, I want to approach youth migration today from three different perspectives. The first one is youth as an actor of migration processes. The second one is youth as an actor of support mechanisms for migrants and refugees. And the last one, which I think it's also equally important, youth as a facilitator or agent of inclusion processes. Before going further with these approaches, with these three approaches, I would like to share with you some brief information about the role of youth in contemporary migratory flows. As we all know, so-called the global migration crisis has become a buzzword of international community, unfortunately, that describes the increased human flow by 2000s, which emerged mostly due to the conflicts and other forced reasons. It's not surprising when it is considered that more than 70 million people around the world, they were forced to flee their homes only by 2020. However, although there are a growing academic literature and increasing policy level debates about this issue, I think one thing is still not adequately discussed within all of these debates. It is the centrality of youth for the contemporary migration flows. So overall, the young population represents today almost 2/3 of the immigrant and refugee population. Moreover, children below the age of 18 have been constantly increasing, and currently it constitutes half of the refugee population, while it was around 40% only 10 years ago. When we analyze only the refugee population, displaced population, again, almost half of the refugees are under the age of 18. For the case of international migrants, the young population represents an extensive group in almost every immigrant receiving country. Bless you. However, migrants and refugees more than numbers. I mean, these are just the statistics. They don't only have specific needs, but they might also bring skills and dedication to the communities that they settle. Consequently, this situation makes a certain issue an issue to be discussed within all societies. This issue is integration and inclusion. If we want to talk about integration, we need to refer a process of settlement, interaction with the host society, and social change that follows immigration. As a researcher of international relations in our discipline, we frequently address to the concept of security. So in terms of integration, we can say that from the moment immigrants arrive in a host society, they must secure a place for themselves. They need to feel secure as an essential element of this process. As human beings, they need to find a place in a social and cultural realms, as well as cooperation and interaction with the other individuals in the host societies. Yet, this is a two-way mechanism, and the host society is also a compulsory actor of this process. So here, I think we also need to get into deeper about the concept of inclusion, together with the concepts of cohesion, by discussing the social inclusion and social cohesion concepts together. Very briefly, social inclusion refers to migrants' inclusion and their full economic, social, cultural, and political participation into host societies, as we all know. On the other hand, social cohesion refers to concepts such as anti-discrimination, countering xenophobia, and promoting mutual understanding among individuals and societies. It is very important to note, it is indicated by several studies, integration occurs in the public and private realms across generations and both at individual level and also national, so social levels. These facts, in particular emphasis on generations, reminds us again the role of youth in the inclusion processes. And here, if we turn back to our discussion about the role of youth again, I would like to first share with you some data about the needs of young migrants and refugees for inclusion by giving some specific examples from our country, from the young refugees in Turkey. In Turkey, the total population which might be considered as refugees in accordance with the relevant definition of international community is basically over 4 million, including more than 3.7 million Syrians under temporary protection. Mostly it is underestimated, but the number of Syrians aged between 15 and 30 is more than 1 million in Turkey right now. And this figure is corresponding to almost 1/3 of all Syrians living in the country. Overall, the population under the age of 30 composes also a significant proportion of the asylum seeker groups who come from different countries. Therefore, as we see, the young population comes inside as one of the key features of refugees also in Turkey, like in many countries. As previously discussed, within the framework of migration, the youth, the group of young people, they represent more than a demographical group. This group is important both with their needs in education, social life, employment, health, accommodation, and also by being potentially more open to be integrated into the host societies. That's why young refugees can be discussed as a dilemma-creating group, since they are closely connected both with opportunities and threats at the same time. In this respect, as to understand this situation better and explore the needs, we conducted a research study in Turkey regarding the situation and needs of young refugees in Turkey, which can be, we thought, which can be an example for many young refugees, needs of the many young refugees all over the world. So far, it was one of the most comprehensive studies about young refugees in Turkey. The research supported by the Community Volunteers Foundation and United Nations Population Fund, and we published the full report in 2020, in June 2020. So with this study, what we have targeted, we targeted to explore not only opportunities or threats about refugees, but to provide a guiding manual for the relevant stakeholders in Turkey for strategies about young refugees in the society. We reached around 1,500 refugees. Since we have a very limited time period, today I would like to give some insights on this discussion. Background noise, you can hear me well. So, what we have found out, consequently, we explored the needs of young people in six different domains of inclusion. These are education, employment, social cohesion, and communication with local community, health, life in Turkey, future, and the role of stakeholders for the young refugees. First of all, our research showed that youth is a forgotten identity for many of the young refugees, unfortunately. On the basis of the research process and the whole interviews, it comes out that young refugees do not consider being young as a complementary element of their identity. And again, unfortunately, youth is of secondary importance for many of them. Even in focus group interviews, we observed that young refugees focus on other dimensions of problems, although in each question we try to understand their needs as a young person together with being a refugee. So what we found out about the young refugees' need in our study, the first domain, as we all expect, it was about education. As the target group of our study, young refugees are not only among the most important potential beneficiaries of education, but also education is one of the key needs for this group. All that data, all of our data about young refugees revealed that schooling rate of young refugees sharply decreases after the primary school, directly proportional to the increasing age due to a variety of reasons. Among young respondents, only 40% of them continue their education and 15% of them illiterate. In general, it appears that obligation of working is the most important reason for the school dropouts. This reason is followed by income inadequacy and lacking language skills. These are the major reasons for the exclusion of the young refugees from educational life. The second domain was employment. As expected again, unfortunately, the formal employment rate is still too low. And when we list the reasons for the low recruitment rate and non-formal employment, insufficiency of employment opportunities is the primary reason. And also, again, here we met with the need of language competency, which is a certain barrier, both inclusion to the employment and also educational opportunities for young refugees. Another important issue we identified is the social distance between young refugees and local youth. For instance, in our research, around half of young refugees expressed that they do not have any local friends, any friends from the local community, which is a high number. Communication is also identified as a challenge for the inclusion of young refugees. For instance, young refugees expressed that they have a fear of making a mistake in the society. Some of them stated that they have difficulties to build up healthy relationships with local youth because of the internal fear of being subject to exclusion in case when they make a mistake, if they make a mistake. If we sum up, our findings were very similar with the many studies around the world about young refugees, which can be summarized under the headings of lack of language skills, communication problems, lack of education, restricted access to the host society labor market, cultural barriers, lack of social networks, as well as health problems and traumas as a result of the conflict and violence that they faced in their previous communities. So these are the major needs for young refugees within the inclusion process. Now I would like to discuss other side of the coin. Youth is not only a dependent or actor of migration processes, as we discussed at the beginning of my speech. In many host societies, young people, they are also an agent of change and enforcement by actively supporting inclusion processes of young refugees. So they are a notable group in the migrant integration process as part of the support mechanisms. They don't only constitute an important part of immigrant and refugee population, but also they are a part of the possible solution mechanisms for young refugees and migrants under the heading of youth work. At the same time, this makes the youth work essential for the young refugees and migrants living in our societies, because most of the youth workers in the area of civil society is below the age of 30 in many countries. So several initiatives which are quite important are implemented by NGOs, and within the structure of the non-governmental organizations, NGOs, youth is a remarkable group. Youth has a prominent role. So youth work can also support refugees by shaping their identities and by providing their better inclusion to the host societies. So briefly, we can say that they have a central role in inclusion policies, both as a group which have demands for inclusion, but also as service providers. Similarly, in its reports, European Commission also underlines that youth work has convergent dimensions with some other policy areas such as formal education, social work, health, justice, sports, guidance, and counseling, and also cultural inclusion. So these are also major channels to integrate young migrants and refugees into host societies, and they are also very useful, very fruitful actors for self-determination, self-confidence, self-esteem, and socialization of the young refugees. Therefore, we can accept young people as an indispensable part of support mechanisms for young refugees and migrants living in our societies. That's why we are also talking about the needs of we need to also talk about the needs of young youth workers working together with the young refugees. In this regard, in line with the purpose of one of our research projects, which we conducted 3 years ago, and which was a similarly strategic partnership project, we asked youth workers in Europe about their needs while working with young refugees. I would like to continue by giving some examples because I think for providing better solutions to answer, to response, to providing responses, both of the groups, both service providers and also young migrants and refugees are quite important. For instance, around 50% of youth workers in our study from different European countries, they indicated that they needed structured training about migration and the needs of the refugees. So it showed us, in spite of the experience in youth work in the field, most of them, they didn't involve in any particular training, any official training about refugees, about dealing with refugees. In general, our survey, as a result of our field study, we identified 5 major common fields that youth workers indicated as a gap in their works together with young refugees. These are knowledge about target group, knowledge about opportunities, knowledge about dealing with the target group, namely here young refugees, knowledge about communication and conflict management, and also developing solutions for the target group. Almost in all survey countries, around 40% of youth workers are not trusting their knowledge about the legal status and rights of the migrants and refugees in their societies. And also our survey demonstrated youth workers don't feel themselves comfortable in distinguishing characteristics of different migrant groups within their societies. We asked them whether they know available services for young refugees in their countries. At least 50% of youth workers in each survey country indicated that they lack of enough knowledge about available services for migrants and refugees. Similarly, they don't feel themselves very familiar with the related stakeholders and actors in the field of migration and refugees. We asked some question about dealing with the target groups. Around 60% of youth workers to deal with young migrants and refugees with trauma is a big question, and they are not also confident their knowledge about how to manage emotions while dealing such a traumatized people group. Another issue was communication and conflict management. We asked them whether they trust themselves on how to communicate with young migrants and refugees, but here also we received negative responses from many of the respondents. Finally, we tried to understand their capacity to produce solutions for the immigrants and refugees, and we asked some questions about these issues. So what can be our takeaways from all these data? I would like to share some concluding remarks in light of these all data and information while concluding my speech here. First and foremost, it's very clear that youth is an active and important actor of not only migratory flows, but also all processes, including post-migration and support mechanism processes also. Secondly, their inclusion is essential both for providing their needs, or secure them, and also for the peaceful future of the societies. Thirdly, young people might be a facilitator of these processes by actively working in the field and developing bridges between generations and societies. Mostly we ignore this fact while focusing on young groups, but they are also a part of the dialogue mechanisms within the societies between different generations or groups within these societies. Finally, I believe a sound inclusion process might be built only by equal contribution and involvement of both immigrant youth and local youth into these activities. Therefore, I find really important all the initiatives that bring both migrant and local youth together. I would like to thank you very much for your passion to listen this speech and for your participation to this organization. I wish you a very fruitful conference day by lots of insightful remarks and